The fog was so thick we couldn't see across the parking lot. Is this what I've wanted for 5 years? My goal was to set a Guinness World Record for the oldest woman to cycle across Europe. It would be the 6th time I set a record, but this record would be my most ambitious. For one, it would be the longest, longer than I had just flown across the Atlantic Ocean, cycling through 12 foreign countries whose languages I didn't know. For another, I would cycle most of the way, nearly 3,000 out of 4,300 miles, self-supported, meaning I would carry everything I needed on my bike. The longest I had done that way was 1,000 miles. I would continue the theme of my rides for the past decade: peace. When I was 20, I lost my older brother in the Vietnam War. His death in a pointless war left a gaping hole in our family. If by cycling for peace I could prevent even one family from suffering this trauma, it would be worth it. I cycled 14,500 miles in 6 years to superimpose a peace sign over North America. I planned my route through Europe to pass through a site related to peace in each country. The first was at the very start of the ride. In this remote spot, 450 miles north of the Arctic Circle, my first pearl of peace stood up to the wind. Children of the World was the brainchild of a Norwegian writer. He brought 7 children from 7 countries to dream of peace on earth. Each child made a clay disc to symbolize what peace meant to them. We grabbed their bikes, braced against the wind, and rolled them to the official ride start, the iconic globe of Nordkapp. We looked over the cliff where we knew the Arctic Ocean was supposed to be, but we couldn't see it for the fog. Our intention was to leave at midnight, together and in solidarity with the 30 cyclists who were racing to Tarifa, Spain. Among them was Sarah Cinquini. We had ridden on the bus with Sarah and others to the start. Midnight was several hours away, so we chummed with some of the racers. It was cozy inside Nordkapp Hall. We really didn't want to go anywhere. We watched the weather conditions deteriorate outside. At 9 p.m. we made the call. We couldn't see across the parking lot. My glasses were so fogged up I had to take them off. I attached my rear-view mirror to my glasses. I could barely see in front of me for the fog, and I couldn't see behind me without my rear-view mirror. The 30-mile-an-hour crosswind pushed us so hard that I stayed in the middle of the road. I had to rely on hearing to detect if anyone was behind me. This was a rare, tranquil moment in this 21.5-mile ride. Relieved to arrive at our lodging, we spread out all our stuff to dry. And that was day 1. The monster tunnel was on the menu for day 2. This tiny fishing village has been connected to the mainland since 1999 by a very, very long tunnel that goes under the sea. For 5 years, I dreaded going through that tunnel, and now I was face to face with it. I coasted downhill for 2 miles to 700 feet below sea level. And then came the payback. 2 miles uphill at a wicked 10% grade. I thought I'd be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it had a curve in it, so I couldn't see it until I was nearly out of the tunnel. I was relieved to have the tunnel behind me and happy to share the road. We cycled from the east to the west coast of Norway in 2 days. In the United States, that takes a couple of months. Callan convinced me to ride self-supported. I was dubious, But for months, I whittled my stuff down until it could fit into this bike packing setup on my bike, whose name quickly became Europa. I eased my concern by making a careful selection of spare parts. They were too bulky for my efficient bike packing setup, and they were too heavy for my backpack. They'd already ripped a hole in it. The idea was to send them ahead of myself. That didn't go as planned. When we got back to Alta, we shipped our bike bags to our final destinations. One of them made it. Having dealt with stuff, we went outside to marvel at our incredibly long shadows in the midnight sun. In the morning, we launched into territory we had not seen from the bus that we rode from Alta to the start in Nordkapp. We didn't stay long at this waterfall because we shared the space with another creature. My-Lys told us how to deal with them at her lodging. We tried everything she said. I batted mosquitoes most of the night. I crawled inside my duvet cover. I applied insect repellent. I may have gotten a few winks of sleep. The beautiful food that My-Lys prepared got my mind off of the mosquitoes for a while. Near the end of our time in Norway, we pulled off at a rest stop by a lake to have a snack. This time we were ready for the mosquitoes. Unexpected was a somber plaque placed in memory of Norwegian soldiers who were stationed in this remote place during the winter of 1945. They were here until Nazi Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945. During the 5 years that I prepared for this journey, I read everything I could get my hands on. While some Norwegians would do Hitler's dirty work, others resisted. Odd Nansen was one of them. His organization provided safe haven for Jews fleeing from Nazi-controlled areas of Europe. When the Nazis got to Norway, he was on their radar. He became one of 40,000 Norwegians held in Nazi prisons and concentration camps. During his 3.5 years of imprisonment, he kept a daily diary. He recorded the casual brutality and random terror that characterized camp life, and then he figured out ingenious ways to smuggle out his descriptions. The land Norwegians call home was occupied by Nazi Germany from 1940 to 1945. Kellen and I cycled freely in dramatic Norway, independent since then. This was the first of 11 unimpeded border crossings. Finland was the calm sister to drama queen Norway, calm except for one close call. She served up forests, reindeer, a fox, long rivers, and countless lakes. What on earth? Was this reindeer standing its ground? I sent a photo to Tina, our hostess on the reindeer farm. She said it was her reindeer and that he was peeing. Yeah. Oh, shoot. Oh, whoa, big fish going right up to it. We have no choice but to go by. He really doesn't know what to make of us. Sweet. We were the guests of Armi and Kalle. They had been married over 40 years. They had purchased a lodge used by foresters and later by reindeer herdsmen and moved it onto their property so they could have reunions with their entire family. And then it was a bed and breakfast for a while. They lived 2 cycling days north of the Arctic Circle. It wasn't marked on the road. We had a significant moment of geek trying to figure out exactly where it was. It matched up pretty closely to a tar line across the road. We'd had over 300 consecutive hours of daylight at that point. At nearby Santa Claus Village, the Arctic Circle is celebrated in a big way. We continued south from the Arctic Circle across this bridge. Thinking I don't want to get real close to that while the logs are flying. We experienced foresters at work close up. While resting by a beautiful lake on our way to Puolanga, we heard a clatter in the parking lot behind us. The noise came from Arnold, a Dutch cyclist who was self-supported and camping. He was also headed for Tarifa, but he didn't make it. Something happened to him in Lithuania. I had mailed my spare parts package to myself in Puolanga. It was stuck in the customs office in Helsinki, 400 miles to our south. The second Peace Pearl was a short drive from Puolanga. The land that Finns call home was invaded by Russia in 1939, just prior to World War II. The Winter War Monument stands in a stone-studded field, each stone representing a soldier lost. 105 brass bells, one for each day of the war, ring softly in the wind, serving as a reminder of the absurdity of war. Finnish soldiers dressed in white uniforms, camouflaging them in the snow. The invaders set up camp all lined up on a single road into Finland. Finnish soldiers cut down trees at intervals along this road, so the invaders could neither receive supplies nor proceed forward. Through 5 years of communication with Tarmo, our host, in Puolanga, he came to know that I was somewhat fascinated with Russia. When we concluded our visit to the Winter War Monument, he asked if we wanted to go to the border. Call it the appeal of the forbidden, but Kalin and I both decided we wanted to go. When we arrived at the border barrier, we noticed a woman walking towards us. When we met at the gate, she explained that she had tried 7 times to get a visa to enter Russia, but had entered Russia without one just then. It seemed too easy and not at all dangerous, so Kellen and I went. Here we are with fingers and toes in Russian airspace. The road on which the Russians invaded is now called Peace Road. The forest where we found ourselves is now called Peace Forest. The farther south we got in Finland, the more water we encountered. Suomi is the Finnish word for Finland, and it means swampland. Seagulls gave us the clue that water was near. We cycled across several narrow land bridges. and islands in the middle of rivers. There were World War II cemeteries in several towns, soothed by uplifting scenery. We'd been cycling by flowers on the day we knew we would reach the 1,000-mile mark. I was looking forward to configuring them into the number 1,000. But it happened on a barren piece of city street, so I had to get more creative. There was a lot of excitement at this bridge. People were gathering to watch a canal boat. I parked my bike by the side of the bridge to join the onlookers. Kellen came up behind me and said, "I wouldn't park there if I were you." I grabbed my bike and scooted it forward just barely in time to avoid being dropped into the canal. It was the first of 2 rescues in 2 days by Kellen. The receptionist gave her the keys to the tower. The views were stunning, but we were distracted by the plight of a couple of birds in the tower. I followed Kellen's lead to gently grasp the back of the bird. We carried them down to escape their prison. We were closing in on Helsinki. Close to Helsinki, we were astonished at how young children were allowed to ride their bikes unaccompanied by an adult. On our way into Helsinki, we cycled right past the building where my spare parts package was held hostage in customs. A few hundred feet away was the Peace School that I had discovered while scouring maps of Helsinki. It gave me such hope, but it was a restaurant. And the guy who was setting up tables shooed us away and wouldn't even let us take photographs inside. Maybe the Statue of Peace would give me hope. Finland placed the statue prominently in the harbor in 1968 to express friendship with Russia. As for the monument to world peace installed by Russia, well, that was another story. The Finnish government dismantled it after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Kellen and I cycled freely in calm Finland, free since 1917 and free of invasion since 1940. From the start in Nordkapp, we had been on the road for 25 days. We'd covered 1,128 miles, a quarter of the entire voyage, and had climbed 38,510 feet. We boarded the ferry from Helsinki in pouring rain, but it cleared as we approached Estonia. The Tallinn TV tower dominated the horizon as we approached. The land Estonians call home was occupied by the Soviet Union for half a century, from 1940 to 1991. It lost a fifth of its population during this regime of terror. The spire to the left of the base of the TV tower is a memorial to Estonian victims of communism. But Estonians resisted. In 1991, on August 20th, a coup d'etat was underway in Moscow. The Estonian government seized the moment and unanimously resolved to restore its independence. When the Soviets heard about this, they ordered troops to Tallinn's TV tower. At the base of the tower, ordinary Estonians blocked the tanks. 4 Estonian men, 2 policemen, and 2 engineers dashed into the elevator and ascended to the control room on the 22nd floor. One of them wedged a matchbook into the elevator door, jamming it and disabling the elevator. By the time the troops got up the stairs to the control room, the 4 men had locked themselves in. The troops demanded that they open the door. The Estonians threatened to activate the fire suppression system. Everyone in the building would die. The bluff worked. The Estonians continued their broadcast. The Soviet troops withdrew. During occupation, Estonians kept their culture alive through song. At the Song Festival grounds overlooking the Baltic Sea, 30,000 people sing to an audience of 100,000. In the 1988 festival, Estonians sang their unofficial national song under the noses of Soviet officials. To restore independence, Estonians sang, jammed elevators with matchbooks, and held hands. The 50th anniversary of the pact made by Stalin and Hitler to divide up Europe was coming up. In just a few weeks, a plan was devised to organize 2 million people across 3 countries to hold hands for 15 minutes. 2 million people, 400 miles, 15 minutes. This jubilant act made the news in the West and brought attention to the plight of the Baltic countries. A week after we left Tallinn, by sheer coincidence, we met someone who participated in the Baltic Way. A sand pit and a lot of bridges lay between us and the moment that we would meet Liga. Kalin picked up a bunch of young fellows on our way to Pärnu. On the cobblestone roads coming into Pärnu, the plastic piece that protects my cleats and provides traction when I push off came off. When I realized it, it was too late to go back and look for it. I had this spare part with me on the bike. However, if I lost another one, it could become a problem. At the beach in Pärnu, I didn't seem too worried about it. Kalin's sidekick, Wallace, met Ani's travel assistant, Snuff, and that became the beginning of a solution for my missing package. Ani is an engineer and a determined problem solver. She came up with a plan. In the Baltics, storks became our wildlife companion the way reindeer had been in Norway and Finland. Kalin's brother had sung in a choir in Estonia during Soviet occupation. He recalled it as drab, and he was constantly under surveillance. Kalin and I cycled freely in feisty Estonia, independent since 1991. We'd been cycling for a month and had 1,264 miles in our rear view mirror when we reached Latvia. Kalin and I did a mini Baltic Way at the border. The land that Latvians call home was occupied by the Soviet Union from 1940 to 1991, the same as Estonia. A storm came out of nowhere. We took refuge in a tiny store. The gal in charge went about her business stocking shelves, maybe to ignore us dripping on her floor. That delay put us at a crossroads at the same time as these 2 gals. We were all blocked by a truck across the road. It was just long enough for them to notice our impressive cycling gear and for us to notice their impressive hiking gear. Liga and Paula were training for an 80-mile hike in a few months. Liga, I'm fascinated by the Baltic Way. I was there, she said. I have to know more. We have a day off in Riga tomorrow. Can we get together again? A bit later, our route didn't quite make sense. I spotted the faintest trail and we followed it. We had to lift our bikes over these railroad tracks. 3 minutes later, a train went by. A paved road soon gave way to a sandy trail. We pushed our bikes for 2 miles. The sand got in my socks and rubbed against my heel. I got a blister that demanded first aid on the spot. It was late when we arrived at our lodging. We were exhausted and hungry. We didn't have the energy to go seek out a place to eat, so we just ate at the hotel. The Pearl of Peace I had chosen for Latvia was the Freedom Monument. It was only a quarter-mile away. Tomorrow, we decided. We opted for a short walk around the block. Someone called to us. We didn't know anybody in the city. We were face to face with Arnold, who we'd met 700 miles before in Finland. He showed us the gash in his leg where a dog had bitten him in Lithuania. Arnold, Sarah Cinquini, and I set out at the same time with the same ambition to cycle from Nordkapp to Tarifa, but we each had different outcomes. Arnold had to abandon his goal. I had 2 months and thousands of miles to go, and we got word that Sarah had completed her race to Tarifa in just 29 days, averaging 160 miles per day. For Latvians, the Freedom Monument symbolized independence. For that reason, the Soviets considered demolishing it while they occupied the country. Riga's Freedom Monument was the midpoint of the Baltic Way. The moment was captured by a 19-year-old historian who happened to be visiting Riga from East Berlin. It was the first free demonstration he had ever participated in. 2.5 months later, the Berlin Wall came down. We climbed up a church tower to preview our route out of the city the next morning. The truly special moment of the day was meeting up with Liga and her 2 daughters for dinner at a traditional restaurant. I probed Liga's memory about the Baltic Way. For Liga, it was a happy event. Her memories were fuzzy, but she wanted me to know about the barricades. She shared her personal family photos with me. In May 1990, the Latvian parliament voted to restore independence. The Soviets were determined to get the Latvians in line. They sent tanks towards downtown Riga. Ordinary Latvians used whatever they could to make access to the city difficult. Liga's father sat with others around bonfires day and night, prepared to defend the city with their bare hands if necessary. Liga's mother, on the right, took tea and food to those guarding the streets. The Latvian press was prepared to broadcast any violence that the Soviets inflicted on the city. The Soviets were still concerned about how that would look to the world and backed off 2 weeks later. Paula told us about a tall monument that used to stand on the far side of the river. We'd be going by it. Its official name was the Victory Memorial to the Soviet Army. Locally, they called it Moscow's Finger. For 37 years, Latvians despised the monument, but tolerated it so as not to poke the bear. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was the final straw. The Latvian government demolished it on August 25, 2022, and created a peaceful park in its place. Liga, Paula, and Krista presented us with amber angels to safeguard our journey. The amber angels and storks kept us company throughout Latvia. In 2014, Riga moved its National Library across the river to the unique new triangular building on the left. To transfer the collection, the city organized volunteers. Liga and Paula snagged a couple of coveted volunteer spots. They handed books person to person across this bridge in a symbolic Baltic Way of books. Trains ran back and forth between Riga and a nearby beach town. Our route showed an unpaved section ahead. We opted to do a short section on a highway. We didn't know that the consequent bridge crossing involved a choice between cycling with the semis or on a narrow, thin metal ledge. Had we stuck with the original route, we would have missed this tiny church where religion was practiced all through Soviet occupation, when most other churches were shuttered. Callan and I cycled freely in vibrant Latvia, independent since 1991. The land Lithuanians call home was occupied by the Soviet Union from 1940 to 1991, just like the other Baltic states. This was country number 5 for us. Past Cherry people, storks, and a swan family, we arrived at the Hill of Crosses. From a distance, it looks drab, but the close-up details caught me. For a few hundred years, Lithuanians have come here to find peace or hope. During the 50 years of occupation, the Soviets tried to wipe out religion. Tanks bulldozed the hill several times. Each morning afterwards, new crosses sprouted, placed by brave people who snuck through barricades at great risk. It was a quiet, meditative place. Visitors exchanged only quiet murmurs. So it was shocking when military jets roared overhead, a vivid reminder of how close we were to Russia and how vulnerable Lithuania and the other Baltic states are. There was news about my spare parts package. It had arrived in Puolanka, 700 miles away, 3 full weeks after we had left. This castle in Lithuania is the first one that we visited inside, complete with an impressive kitchen, cooking herbs, and a dungeon, and the required tower. Conveniently, it rained while we were inside touring the castle. There were many more castles on the path ahead. No matter how charming, a castle is an outdated mode of protecting one's pixel on Earth. They've been replaced with mobile militaries that protect national borders. Will the day come when national militaries, like castles, become obsolete? The tanks were training about 25 miles from Kaliningrad, a piece of Russia detached from the mainland. Our route took us to a Lithuanian town right on the border with Kaliningrad, where we touched Russia for the second time. This is what not being free looks like. During the 50 years of Soviet occupation, Lithuania lost 1 million people, a third of its population, to deportations, executions, murders of political opponents, and forced emigration. Kalin and I were lucky to cycle freely in quirky Lithuania, independent since 1991. The Baltics are dwarfed by Russia, and yet the tiny countries succeeded in standing up to Russia. Will they remain free? In 40 days, we cycled 1,649 miles through 5 countries. For 123 years, Poland was not recognized as a country and did not appear on world maps. Later, during the World War II years, Poland was occupied by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Poland has had a stormy history, and we had a stormy forecast for our first day there, heavy wind and rain in the afternoon, so we got an early start. We reached our town as Sunday Mass was wrapping up. The priest was blessing cars with holy water, so we got in line with our bikes. A new talisman joined our collection. People were dressed in their wedding best when we crashed into the scene in our grungy cycling clothes. From our cozy room, we watched the storm outside. We bucked some leftover headwinds and dodged debris from the storm. It took us to a tri-point border where Kaliningrad, Lithuania and Poland all met up. This was the most menacing border I saw on the entire trip across Europe. Maji, a former banker, and his wife Aneta, the owners of Valley of Happiness, took great care of us, but we couldn't figure out why they didn't warn us about this road that was out just a mile from their property. Poland offered a fair share of challenging road surfaces that contributed to an equipment breakdown. The clip on my right shoe broke. The horseshoe clip is brilliantly simple. It snaps into the cleat. A metal piece snaps over the horseshoe clip. A cleat protector snaps over everything. The cleat attaches to the shoe. The cleat opening matches the lollipop pedal, and through the shoe, I'm connected to the pedal. My energy is efficiently transferred to the drive mechanism. I engage different muscles for the upstroke and spread the work of propulsion. A simple twist of my heel disengages the horseshoe clip and disconnects me from the bike. We found a bike shop that day. Paul replaced my chain, but he didn't have replacement cleats. My spare parts package had made it to Ani the engineer. The part I needed was in it. But Ani lives in Kajaani, Finland, 1,000 miles away. On our way into Turun, we encountered walkers on a 12-day pilgrimage. Their destination was Yasnagora. We checked our maps and realized that we were not going there, but the name stuck with us. Turun is proud of her native son, Copernicus. He altered our perspective of the place of the earth in the universe. The inscription on his statue, "He moved the earth and stopped the sun." Now, 500 years later, we understand that perspective so much better. Earth is but a speck in the universe. There's no other place like it that we know of. No other place surely capable of supporting life that we know of. Rather than wasting resources on fighting each other, it might be a good idea to use them to protect the earth. It's the only home that we all have. Cardinal Wyszynski led Poland's resistance to communism in the 1980s. In fact, he spent 3 years in prison for his activism. The Church of the Holy Spirit in Turun was the hotbed of resistance. I had a bad feeling when our destination town was crossed out on the road sign. It would have been a long detour, but on bikes we were able to get through. It was worth it. It got us to this former sugar beet factory, one of our favorite lodgings on the entire trip. Home to the longest indoor slide in the world, they served up a vast breakfast buffet. These were the breakfast desserts. The transformation of this factory into a whimsical lodging exemplified the ingenuity and creativity we experienced throughout Poland. Breakfast fortified us to reach mile 2,000 of our journey. It occurred by a stubbly field. Just a little further ahead, Kalin found this bus shelter, a more suitable place to celebrate our 2,000-mile mark. A family played on the adjacent playground, and that's where we found a pearl that we had not planned. The dad saw we were taking selfies and offered to take pictures for us in perfect English. "You never know who you're going to meet when you go to take out the trash," he said. The family headed home down the lane. Kalin and I snacked. Kalin noticed that the guy turned around. When he got back to the bus stop, he said, "Would you like to come to our house and have vegetables from our garden?" We had 30 miles to go. I saw Kalin hesitate and I said, "Sure." And so we had an impromptu lunch. with Oleg, Iga, and their adorable son. I've stayed in touch with Oleg. After the U.S. election in November of 24, he and I discovered we had different political views. Because of our deeply human meeting, we made a deliberate choice to overcome that, and we continue to communicate respectfully. Fortified by our celebratory surprise lunch, we made it to Poznan. With so many miles to go, I think I might have been in denial about the fact that my left foot hurt. If my foot could have spoken up, it might have exclaimed this building's name. As we approached our next destination, we encountered a friendly local cyclist. We couldn't communicate at all, not even with Google Translate, but he took a look at my cue sheet and assured me that he was from the town we were headed to. He accompanied us the whole way there, all the way to the street with the umbrellas. I was curious about the name of our lodging. Google Translate clarified. It meant Royal Castle. As a bed and breakfast, it was a little diminished from its former glory. In our last town in Poland, we ate in good company, just not at the same time. Napoleon once ate here. It seemed Poland wanted to leave us with one more memory of her interesting roads. Is that a dog? Or a wolf? Kalin and I cycled freely through energetic Poland, independent since 1945. Poland is dwarfed by Russia. Since my return, the United States' support of NATO has cooled. Oleg and other Polish men will be called for military training. Will Poland be able to stay free? In 51 days, Kalin and I had cycled through 6 countries. I was now halfway to Tarifa. The day that we entered the Czech Republic was the same day that Mary received my spare parts package in Arlington, Virginia, 4,300 miles away. This was part of Ani the engineer's remarkable plan to reconnect my package and me. When Kalin previewed the next day's route, she noticed that there was a Yasna Gora pretty close to it. That was the destination of the pilgrims we'd seen about a week before. It didn't make sense because we were in the Czech Republic and we knew Yasna Gora was in Poland. But we detoured to it anyway. It was all uphill. Ironically, this Yasna Gora was in Poland. We had crossed back into Poland without even realizing it. There was no border control, no sign, no nothing. I experienced porous borders during the entire trip, an indication of trust among the European Union nations. In fact, we stumbled on signs for the Tour de Tri-Point, a bike ride in 3 countries celebrating open borders. The upside of an uphill is the downhill. Fortunately, my bike has disc brakes. From this high vantage point, we saw wind turbines and a nuclear power plant. 2,000 miles into this trip, we were averse to unpaved roads. At the top of a hill, our route showed an unpaved road to the left. I went straight and stayed on the paved road. However, this time, the workaround to avoid the unpaved road was many miles. So we gave the unpaved road a try. It was worth it. It led to a wild downhill where I squeezed my brakes hard when I saw the castle atop the hill. On a high meadow, it felt like my nose was in a jar of honey. Roiling fish hinted at what was to come. The land Czechs call home was occupied by Nazi Germany from 1938 to 1945. So I'm pushing the bike up a 12% hill that we need to do to get to the Peace Garden. We hope it's actually there. We didn't know what we were looking for. It could be a square yard with a wilted flower in it. We topped a hill and Kalin spotted a large expanse ahead. One day, children came home from school and played with the geese in the local pond of this little town. The man Hitler appointed to oversee the Czech territory was ambushed by paratroopers of the Czech resistance. This village was suspected of harboring resistors and aiding the paratroopers. Hitler took revenge on it. He ordered the annihilation of the entire village. Through photos, articles of clothing, and documents, the museum brings to life the sweet village before the massacre. Recorded interviews with survivors provide vivid detail of the massacre itself. The story of this village occupies one paragraph in a 412-page book about World War II. How many peace gardens will we have to build before humans stop brutality towards one another? What do you think? Oh, wow. Hidden behind that castle was a massive 10% switchback climb. Don't blink, you might miss another castle. We made it into Germany, but we still had 13 miles and a lot of climbing to get to our destination. I wonder what this X is about. Dang, a wrong turn. It's wrong. Ugh. There's another Christmas tree pole. One more climb. We can do it. We made it to the top of the final hill. We thought we had a half a mile to go all downhill. But two bad things happened. There was no road. And after 2,400 miles, we had our first flat. We had to walk our bikes down a steep rocky path in the woods. That last half mile turned into 2 and took well over an hour. For the first time, I almost ran out of water. I drank 5 glasses when we got to our lodging while Kalin fixed her flat. The next morning, it was flat again. She fixed it the second time. And then with 10 miles to go to a place we knew there was a bike shop, she had her third flat. Again, she fixed it. But there were no more supplies to fix it a fourth time. We crossed our fingers and held our breath. We made it to the bike shop. There was a big festival in town, and the bike mechanics were all busy, but they fit her in. For several days, we'd been seeing this crop. We couldn't figure out what it was. We thought maybe raspberries. And then in Germany, we realized what we were looking at. It was hops. about 10 miles outside of Dachau. I might have been thinking about our upcoming visit to the concentration camp memorial and not paying 100% attention to where I was in the moment. A pair of large buses were coming up behind us, and I decided to get up on the sidewalk. But I didn't angle it right. The curb caught my wheel, and I went down hard. Kellen was ahead of me, and she heard the noise. It sounded worse than it was. In about 3 minutes, I was back on my bike riding again, though I did crack my helmet and got some big bruises. I knew that our route went through the southeastern part of Germany known as Bavaria, but I didn't know the role that Bavaria played in Hitler's story. The hops plants that we'd been seeing had something to do with it. In 1923, Hitler attempted a coup in this beer hall. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He only served 6 months in a jail in this beautiful town on the river called Landsberg. But that was long enough for him to write Mein Kampf. Within 10 years, he got himself elected in a democratic system. And then, in just 53 days, he dismantled democracy. Frenzied supporters flocked to rallies on this spot in Munich. Within months, Hitler had opened a concentration camp in nearby Dachau. He spread concentration and extermination camps all throughout Europe. Munich's Angel of Peace stood while Hitler committed his carnage. Kellen noted that the angel didn't do much good. Still, I'd rather have a symbol of the aspiration. Not everyone got caught up in Hitler's vision. Some walked through a back alley to avoid giving the mandatory Hitler salute. Eventually, through World War II, Hitler was defeated. The difference a day makes. The photo on the left shows bodies found at Dachau's crematorium the day before liberation. On the right are prisoners celebrating their liberation. Hitler committed suicide the next day, and Germany surrendered unconditionally a few days later. Going to Dachau, I fell. Leaving Dachau, my left clip broke, with a big hill looming right in front of me. My right ankle was already cranky from the broken clip on my right shoe. I didn't know if I could do the climbs without any clips at all, but I did the best I could with what I had. We stopped to snack in the shadow of this magnificent building. A week in the Alps was ahead of me, and there was no prospect of replacing my cleats. But my dilemma was trivial compared to 5,000 people who passed through the doors of this arch abbey beginning in 1945. They were survivors, liberated from concentration camps, many from nearby Dachau. Here they took their first steps toward healing. The town of Ursi was a healing stop. We recharged, and so did my bicycle shifters. Each Bavarian town had its unique maypole, a symbol of spring and life. We wouldn't see them for much longer. We wrapped up our time in Germany with an 18% descent. We could see this castle from the top. We're concerned about going down this hill into Austria. These guys are flying out of Austria, going uphill. Entering Austria. We had banked a weather day and were about to need it. We had been able to shift all our lodgings back one night, except for the one in Austria. We figured we'd have no trouble finding a hotel in Bregenz. It's a large city on a lake with lots of hotels. After dipping my finger in the lake, we looked in earnest. With some effort, we found one and made a verbal agreement by phone. I was required to take a photo at the beginning and end of each day. That's what we were doing when a woman came running out of the hotel screaming at us not to take pictures of her hotel. I suggested that wasn't a great way to greet guests. We started to roll our bikes into the lobby and then she really lost it. Actually, the hotel is completely sold out. It was getting late and we really needed a place to stay. Kellen searched on Booking and I looked on Google Maps. With a lot of patience, we eventually found a place, but we didn't know where it was. It might have been a backtrack, but we lucked out. It was ahead of us about 6 miles across the Rhine River. We rolled in about 8 p.m. just as the first raindrops fell. My phone pinged in the lobby. We're in Switzerland? It was nearly dark when we crossed into Switzerland. I didn't see the border crossing. Our total time in Austria was about 2.5 hours, a good chunk of which was looking for lodging. We had cycled for 2 months and were now in our 10th country. St. Margrethen, Switzerland, was the location of our happily found lodging. We rested and watched it rain from our window. By evening, we were restless, so in spite of the rain, we walked way up the hill and got a great view of the town. We had the leisure to literally watch a snail's pace. On our way to Zurich, we had a nice stretch along Lake Constance. Our route to Zurich took us near the home of Simone, one of the racers we had met in Nordkapp. We had a brief and very pleasant reunion. Though she had cycled over 2,500 miles to nearby Bregenz from Nordkapp, Norway, she had never cycled to Zurich, our day's destination, just 40 miles away. Navigating through busy Zurich's maze of construction, rails, people, river, and hills, we finally made it to our destination, right near a bike shop, but they didn't carry what I needed. Kellen had found a complicated tour to go way up high in the Alps to Jungfraujoch. On a bike tour as long as I was doing, I wasn't about to say no to an extra rest day. The world still has some glaciers, and what an opportunity to see one up close. Our trip was ambitious, but the cyclists we saw from the cable car ascending this high mountain were operating at another whole level of ambition. Baden below, Lenzburg Castle above. Kellen thought, Switzerland's a nice place to be a cow. It's also a nice place to cycle downhill. It's a nice place to cycle, period. The day was glorious and going so well. And then an unpaved stretch got worse. A guy came up behind us hauling a couple of kids in a bike trailer. He said, "I think you should do it." So we tried. We spotted what looked like an exit off to the left, but we didn't know it was straight uphill and rocky. We scraped a few pounds of mud off our bikes and then rerouted. Callan insisted that we avoid anything that looked unpaved. Our modified route added more than 8 miles to our ride and skipped the town that had the chocolate shop I was looking forward to. We had some serious washing up to do before dinner. The town's made a fuss of opening day of school. We turned a corner, and Lake Geneva was way below us. That meant that the self-supported time with Callan was coming to a close. It was an extremely steep downhill through the vineyards. My brakes hadn't been checked since I left home. I just couldn't stomach it. I had to walk my bike. Survived the descent, we caught our breath at this castle on the lake. I think that's Mont Blanc. Europa was all set for carrying all my gear for the last time. Most of the way to the airport, where the transition between teams was about to happen, was pretty tranquil, but it had its moments at the end. And then we were 5. Boomer, Mary, and Beth were there to get me the rest of the way to Tarifa. Making it to Geneva in one piece felt like a big deal. No drama. Callan had just enough visa days left to accompany us to the border of France. The bike bag that she had shipped from Norway was waiting for her in Geneva. Thanks to a wonderful employee at the Italian embassy back home, and through my husband being Italian, I was able to obtain an Italian passport just weeks before I left. With that in hand, I had no time limit. Susan Aspinall, a friend from home, lives near Geneva and showed us the town. I had been to the site in San Francisco where the United Nations was conceived, and I'd been to the headquarters in New York by bike. And now I made it to the headquarters in Geneva. Jump back to 1859. Italy is struggling ferociously for her independence. A battle rages in the city of Solferino in northern Italy. Henry Dunant, on a business trip, finds himself in the thick of it. He's horrified by the sight of thousands of soldiers of several nations scattered across the battlefield. On the spot, he organizes the local population to provide care and relief for the soldiers. 3 years later, he wrote a small book about it. 90% of the book is a description of the horrors he saw. In the final pages, he describes an idea for a politically neutral organization dedicated to providing impartial care to battlefield wounded. He did not propose a formula for the prevention of war, only a suggestion for dealing with the aftermath. He was resigned to the inevitability of war. And then he co-founded the International Red Cross. By 1864, it had initiated the Geneva Conventions, still in effect today. In 1901, he was awarded the first Nobel Peace Prize, and then died in poverty a decade later. We looked calm, but preparing for imminent departure was on our minds. An important something arrived with the Geneva to Tarifa team. My spare parts package traveled nearly 15,000 miles to reach me. The most important item? New cleats for my shoes. And Boomer had the expertise and the patience to install them. Without cleats, I had cycled 370 miles, crossed Switzerland's Alps, and climbed the equivalent of halfway up Mount Everest. I was giddy with relief. On a perfect morning, we were all packed and ready to go. Unbridled enthusiasm with a ripple of trepidation. I reveled, riding without a load, with shoes that worked, through a stunning landscape. It was only 12 miles to France. In the exhilaration of the moment, Mary and Boomer cycled right past the border to France. I had to call them to come back so we could take the picture with everyone and also say goodbye to Calais. In 67 days, Calais and I rode 2,926 miles through 10 countries and climbed 93,757 feet. Through the last 2 countries, the plan was for Beth to support Boomer, Mary, and me as we cycled, but it didn't work out that way. Neither Boomer nor I heard or saw Mary go down. We enjoyed the thrilling descent down this hill. But when we got to the bottom, Mary wasn't behind us. We made a quick, strategic decision. I would continue going forward, and Boomer would go back up the hill and look for Mary. He found her being tended by 3 emergency medical technicians. I didn't know what happened or how serious it was until much later. I was really worried about Mary when I got to this beautiful spot. When I got to this dam, I learned that she was in the hospital. The Via Rona bicycle trail was magnificent, but it wasn't the same without Boomer or Mary with me. It wasn't until I got to the day's destination that I learned that Mary's injuries were severe enough that she was going to have to fly home. A devastating end to a summer of training. In an instant, I lost 2 co-riders, one fully planned, the other utterly unplanned. Beth, Boomer, and I continued on the beautiful Via Rona the next morning. The pollinator boxes really work. On the way to Vienne, France, I reached the 3,000th mile of the trip. As we cycled out of Vienne, I was still adjusting to the reality that Mary wasn't going to be with us for the rest of the trip. The ride from Vienne to the Peace Pearl that I chose for France was the hardest of all 95 days of the trip. We cycled 62 miles and climbed over 5,000 feet to the plateau where 5,000 Christians saved 5,000 Jews during the occupation of France by Nazi Germany. There'd be these thrilling descents, and then we'd have to go up again. During Nazi occupation, policemen smoked on this terrace adjacent to the house where about 20 Jewish children were hidden, and this was our lodging in Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. Our hosts, Veronique and Renaud, didn't know the story of the house when they bought it, but they embraced it fully when they found out. Renaud charmed us with his creative cooking and social meals that lasted for hours. France was occupied by Nazi Germany from 1940 to 1944, but the residents of this plateau resisted by hiding thousands of Jews. While Beth and I took a side trip by car to Le Puy, the site of a chapel built on a volcanic plug, Boomer stayed back and tinkered alongside Renaud. Boomer gave Europa, my bicycle, a thorough workover and made her like new, while Renaud created our meal for the evening. Adieu, Veronique et Renaud. 10 miles after we left Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, I reached the highest elevation on my trip, 3,672 feet. It was great that Boomer had checked my brakes because it was a long way down to return to the Rhone River. Boomer's replacement of my cleats had also stabilized my ankles. I had my last episode of cranky ankle as I crossed the bridge over the Rhone. Look up, another castle. Look down, more snails. How about a castle for Sunday breakfast? It was the beginning of what became an 11-hour day on our bicycles. This day in marshy southern France was rich with wild life and wild people. And our first glimpse of the Mediterranean Sea. We exchanged stories with Bianca and Freya, a young German pair who were self-supported and camping. Beth gave them the last of her chocolate stash from Geneva. It was past 6 o'clock when we detached from this delightful pair, and we still had 24 miles to go. Fortunately, the route was flawless, as was Boomer's navigation of it. We barely made it before nightfall. A late night made for a late start in the morning, but the day's route was relatively short and flat. If we could find the right spot, we just might be able to get in a swim in the Mediterranean. This narrow, steep bridge caught me by surprise. Maybe I was thinking about finally swimming in the Mediterranean Sea. I bungled my shifting. I lost momentum and balance. Fortunately, I caught myself. Well, Europa's fork and my right knee did. Dr. Boomer applied anti-itch stick. I screamed. People looked. The location was seared into my flesh. Surprisingly, the warm salt water soothed my fresh wound. Or maybe it was my soul that was soothed. For the moment, rain was forecast for our upcoming pass through the Pyrenees. Now I'd be doing it with rain and 2 wounds. The monument above me where I scraped my knee? It was a memorial to Pierre Brossolette, a French resistance fighter. In 1942, he'd embarked from this spot on a mission to Great Britain. A year and a half later, he was caught by the Gestapo on another mission. He knew too much. Rather than taking the risk of divulging information during torture, he jumped out of a sixth-floor window to his death. The day dawned gloomy in this maritime city. It might have been a portent of the day that awaited. The next day's forecast was for rain. It was also the day that we planned to make a pass through the Pyrenees. The thought of making the descent after the pass on slick pavement made me queasy. So we wondered if we could make it through the pass this day. The first dozen miles wove dreamily on a thread of land among ponds that communed with the Mediterranean. A left turn here headed us into less traveled territory.
Just got done with a 2-mile section of perhaps the roughest gravel I've ever ridden. And there goes Lynn, and she's upright on her bike pedaling. Great.
Boomer's tires would soon pay the gravel toll. We had only ridden 35 miles by the time we met up with Beth about 2 p.m. It was still 50 miles to the first lodging after the pass. I don't know why we still thought we could make it. Then there was a mistake in the route and we had to double back, and Boomer had a flat tire. It was 6 o'clock when we got to the meetup spot with Beth. By this time, it was crystal clear that we weren't going to make the pass. Beth had investigated lodgings. There was something in the town where we were, or something closer to the pass about 13 miles ahead. I knew I needed to get as close to the pass as I could to minimize time on it in the rain. So I continued. It was pushing 8 o'clock when we got to the bridge in Le Boulou. A gal named Sophie and her family were celebrating the migration of the storks. Maybe they were the same storks that had kept Kalin and me company in the Baltics. I was ecstatic to be at the foot of the pass. It was only a few miles to the top and the border of Spain. If only the rain would hold off. I'd been cycling for 77 days through 11 European countries, less than 1,000 miles to go. I was anxious to tackle the pass. It wasn't raining yet. The gravel had devoured Boomer's tires and he needed new ones. I couldn't wait. I had a route through the pass, and Boomer had made a route through the pass. But when I saw this sign that didn't match up with either of them, I jettisoned both routes and gave my trust to the sign. I switched modes from following a route to going on a scavenger hunt for the signs. Since I wasn't following a Garmin route, I couldn't foresee where the climb would end. When I started descending, I couldn't tell if it was temporary or if I had reached the top of the pass. But 10 miles into the ride, I had 1,217 feet above sea level. I've cycled over summits higher than 10,000 feet. I don't know why I was so petrified of this baby one in the Pyrenees. Barcelona sat at sea level about 130 miles away. I descended nearly half of that drop to sea level in the first mile after the summit. Where is the border? Beth met me at the border to celebrate my gleeful entry into the last country of the trip. And then the drizzle started. A steady tailwind pushed me to the destination town, the birthplace of Salvador Dali. I had some things to dry out once I got in the lodging. Spain does dinner at 8. That took some getting used to, as did seafood being considered vegetarian. On our way to the coast, we went through the massive urban center of Girona and witnessed a squabble while we refreshed with fresh squeezed orange juice. After an unexpected sandy and gravelly patch, Boomer protected the investment he had made in my cleats. Beth fortified us with snacks before the insane descent on a highway with entrance ramps down to the sea. We found earplugs among the amenities at our seaside lodging. When music still blared at 4 o'clock in the morning from a nearby bar, I understood why. An unexpected morning downpour foiled our intention to get into Barcelona nice and early. I was eager to get to the city of Antonio Gaudi's architecture that I'd visited as an art student 50 years before. We dodged puddles and pedestrians getting out of town. The pathway along the coast was beautiful, but it had its challenges.
We are in a hike-to-bike, cycle-cross situation.
Oh, shoot.
I think that's the route.
Yeah, this is really tough. There's room for me or the bike, but not both.
Yeah.
And there was Barcelona. A well-hidden ramp took us up to an unexpected memorial. Spain has only been a free country since 1975. This is a memorial to 1,706 people who were executed by firing squad by its dictator, Francisco Franco. Our triumphant arrival at our lodging in Barcelona. When we finally got in at 5 o'clock, I gave my legs the night off. The corn on my left foot really hurt. Beth kindly brought me a delicious vegetable paella for dinner. When I was not welcomed at the cathedral for lack of proper attire, I bailed and went in search of my peace pearl for Barcelona. The Barcelona Institute of Peace has been on my radar for over 5 years. I walked nearly 6 miles in Barcelona to try to find it. The Velcro hooks on the strap of my sandal carved a second wound into my left foot. There was nothing at the address for the Barcelona Institute of Peace. No sign, nothing written on a doorbell. Like Peace School in Helsinki, it seems that the Barcelona Institute of Peace is just a website. I scrutinized Google Maps. It showed me the ultimate surprise, John Lennon Square right around the corner. And lots of local residents living the message. At least Antonio Gaudi's Sagrada Familia very much existed. I had seen it a lifetime before when I was an art student in Florence, Italy. This building deserved to be visited at a snail's pace. The birds and the bees decorated the doors. The late afternoon light was perfect. As was sangria at dinner. After the Barcelona Institute of Peace, there were no more peace pearls to look forward to. The motivator now was the end goal of Tarifa And that was 2 weeks and 750 miles away. I gathered my wits before a whopper of a coastal climb. Beth and Boomer had breakfast. Knowing of the challenge ahead, I knew I would not enjoy it. The sky looked ominous, and then it broke open just before we reached the top of a climb. Someone thoughtfully put in place a bus shelter for us. We were there for an hour while it poured. Our fingers went numb from the cold. A deluge before we went into Barcelona, and another one after we left. By the time we reached Beth an hour later, we were sweating and taking off layers. Oh, this is why there was a barricade blocking our road. Boomer was working on what promised to be a lengthy detour when I spotted pedestrians going over a nearby bridge. We dodged that detour. Why were we finding ancient Roman ruins here? We were close to 1,000 land miles from Rome. How vast was the Roman Empire? Oh, pretty huge. The things we did to stay off of the highway.
What's that?
How'd you like that wormhole?
Well, it was worth it to see this cove. To continue southward, we had to go back up a different way. Boomer stairmastered it. I walked. I will forever associate this sunset with the leftover burrito that exploded in our laundry bag. We were on earnest countdown now. These signs told us how far it was to Tarifa, or so we thought. Boomer took exquisite care of our bikes. The day after this care session, Boomer's knee was acting up. He opted to give his knee a day off and hitched a ride in the van with Beth. What looked like an impossible climb on the route turned out to be a very cool, refreshing tunnel on my all-time favorite Eurovelo route. Beth and Boomer got to our destination hotel before me. They were repulsed by human feces on the wall of the hotel. Could I keep going? Of course, I love being ahead of schedule. The bikeway into Valencia was one of the best I've ever seen. Beth and Boomer found a great lodging in Valencia that enabled us to have an unexpected day off. On our bonus rest day, I explored the architecture of Santiago Calatrava, another great Spanish architect. Proceeding southward from Valencia, we crossed dozens of thirsty riverbeds. And one used as a parking lot. That's why it was shocking to hear about the terrible flooding that occurred on the very path that I took out of Valencia about 6 weeks after I was there. I had obstacles, but not floods. As dry as it was, crops grew. And every so often, an elegant town. We climbed 9 miles out of Ontinyent. Going down was a hoot. Beyond Sachs Castle was the town of Elda, famous for shoemakers. It was a fitting place to give my sapphire slippers some love. A little shoe goo on that worn-out toe. The route to Murcia had a lot of gravel in it, so Boomer and I worked together to improve it. It looked like I was heading straight for that mountain. The route went through a colorful alley. And jumped onto a Eurovelo route that soon was disrupted. Fortunately, we quickly discovered a tiny workaround. Boomer celebrated his 1,500-kilometer mark. I goofed up my math and celebrated my 4,000-mile mark too soon. As a math person, I was mortified when I realized my mistake. If she can cycle in Murcia, so can I. The city was abuzz, but we didn't know why. As I made my way to the table that Boomer had found for dinner, there were loud booms and smoke and lots of sirens. Yet nobody seemed concerned. The lights in the plaza went dark, and there was a hush. An ancient conflict between Moors and Christians was enacted. If I had tried to plan this, it wouldn't have worked out. Again, lush plants next to desert lake terrain. Shortly after noon, Boomer caught up with me at this sign. Fluent in Spanish, he enjoyed conversing with local cyclists. He had shared our goal with one of them. The guy advised against our plan to go inland and suggested following the coast, but I didn't learn that until later, hours after we had arrived in Puerto Lumbreras. There's lots of time to think on a long bike ride. Had I found out at this sign, I'd have had hours to think about what to do. I received this news about 8 p.m. By that hour, I was mentally preparing for the tough route I had planned for the next day. Suddenly, I had no route at all, and no idea how to accomplish this major change. I thought the trip was over, failed a week before the finish, after 5 years of planning and anticipation. But I don't give up easily. I pulled myself together and pivoted toward finding a solution. About 10 p.m., we overcame significant tension and worked together on a route that would take us back to the coast. But we were too exhausted to go through the steps to be fairly certain that the route would work. Before we hit the glitches, I reached my real 4,000-mile mark. The route landed us in dismal territory. When we looked closely at Google Maps, it was listed as a reservoir. We explored every option, but there was no way out. We had to backtrack and ride on the highway. Eventually, we reached Tabernas with its castle in a high desert, and the lodging that we hoped for was available. Beth put together a dinner on the terrace. In the morning, we swooped down from the high desert. We made it back to the coast. We cycled past an entire peninsula of water-sucking greenhouses. In spite of all the mishaps, I could feel the end nearing. The corn on my foot hurt so badly, I stabbed my shoe to get some relief. Just in time for the day with 10 climbs and 7 tunnels. I thought the kilometer markers indicated how far it was to Tarifa. We were on countdown. We were closer than we realized. Tarifa was at about kilometer 100. What are wings for without the courage to fly? We celebrated prematurely. We had no idea how hard the last few days would be. Beth served up another delicious deck dinner. I was starting to think about writing in my blog that I'd made it across Europe without a flat. At least it happened after I was done cycling for the day. Boomer and I fixed it in the morning. Maybe one day I'll look back on this day and think it was funny, but now I still feel rattled by it. Even with the giant bull looming over me, the first 24 miles were dreamy. They were on the N340, we'd come to rely on as a good secondary road to avoid the A7 highway. But Malaga is so congested that there isn't room for both, so they merge. When Boomer spotted a pedestrian bridge that would get us off the N340/A7, we took it. But then we had to navigate the neighborhood. We might get into a dead end from which we can't go up, and then figure out how to get back out. On that tense evening in Puerto Lumbreras, we had rerouted along the coast. My original route went back to the coast as well, and Malaga was the place where they met up. But in the moment, I didn't remember that. If I had, we'd have cycled across this whimsical new bridge that was on a Eurovelo route, instead of a ghastly dangerous route through airport traffic. We took our exit from the airport traffic across another pedestrian bridge. It was 4 o'clock when Boomer conveyed the situation and our whereabouts to Beth. And given the hour, Beth wanted to know if we had an idea where we'd be staying that night. We still had to get away from the airport mess, and the only way we could figure out how to do it was through this double circle configuration. It took us 2 hours to get to the spot where Beth was waiting for us, and by then it was 6 o'clock. In the meantime, I'd heard from the lodging that I had booked for the following night that indeed they had 2 rooms for this night. Boomer's route ended 24 miles ahead. 3 weeks earlier, we'd succeeded at a 24-mile dash in France starting at 6 p.m. We both thought we could do it again, and we were highly motivated to try, because if we succeeded, we could get to Tarifa a whole day early. It took contortions to stay off of the A7. Boomer scouted and sent back tips, like not to cross this pedestrian bridge. So I went back down. Beth texted that the lodging was not at the end of the route. It was about 7.5 miles past it. By the time night fell, 3 hours later, we had eked out only 13 more miles. We were far from the lodging with neither light nor a route to get there. I took my required endpoint selfie. A pair of 4-legged visitors liked the spot too. Yeah, wild boars in a congested city. I jumped up on a wall. Beth kindly came to fetch us with the van, and the receptionist at the lodging was very welcoming. She was from Poznan, Poland, where I had been 6 weeks earlier. I was shocked at how close I was to the finish, but I still had to get from the Kasbah back to this lodging. We'd done it in the van on the A7, but I couldn't imagine how I'd do it on a bike. I was so worried I couldn't fall asleep. It must have been 3 a.m. before I drifted off. When I awoke, I remembered that route that I had. I gathered myself and requested help from Boomer on 2 items. First, could he help me refine the route that I found? Second, could he please find a route from here to the finish? Beth transported me back to the Kasbah. On the way, we saw a cyclist on the A7. Beth chalked a birthday greeting for me on the sidewalk. It's also the International Day of Peace.
Happy birthday!
Then it was time to bring the plan to life. The corn on my left foot was excruciating, especially when I walked. As soon as I got on the boardwalk, a gal informed me that bicycles were not allowed on the weekend, but it was okay to walk. I fretted at each turn, worried there might be a locked gate that would obstruct my path. Each time I made a turn that worked, I breathed a sigh of relief. At one spot, there was a green metal door with surveillance warnings. It was ajar, and I went through. I texted Boomer that I was at the hospital. No, not in the hospital. At the hospital that we found on the route. The one where you suspected there might be a way across the highway. And yes, there's a pedestrian bridge. I would be amiss not to mention the lovely section along the Mediterranean. Or the ballerina where I turned inland toward the lodging. And then I was back. You can see the contortions necessary to stay off of the A7. In fact, I crossed over or under it 10 times in the first 10 miles. Boomer had a route to the finish. It was 70 miles long with 4,000 feet of climbing, but it was something we knew we could do. What's more, Beth and Boomer treated me to birthday dinner. I was so exhausted that Boomer was up and out before me. But something happened with his navigation device, and he had to make up the route on the fly. I was able to follow the route that Boomer gave me, but within a mile I was at this rocky field. I asked him about it, but he didn't reply. He was somewhere else. The route was obstructed in 2 more places. The final one put me on the A7. Apparently, cyclists have the run of it on Sundays when the truckers are off. Beth pointed out the one spot where we could see the Rock of Gibraltar. And then, in an instant, the congested urban insanity ended, and I was on a spectacular trail and then quiet rural roads. I crossed under an aqueduct and came to the final rest stop of the entire 3-month voyage. We gave ourselves a pep talk for the climbs that would start as soon as we turned right on the N340. I'm wrapping up 140,000 feet of climbing, 14,000 of it in the Alps without clips. And there it was, the summit of the final climb. It was literally all downhill from here. The turbine snatched the wind that funnels through the Strait of Gibraltar. Is that Africa? Africa, for sure. Isla de las Palomas. Tarifa.
There she is. She's arriving. You did it.
Beth captured the moment I knew I had made it. I had crossed Europe from the gusts of the Arctic to the windy Strait of Gibraltar, cycling from the solstice to the equinox. The Mediterranean Sea on my left, the Atlantic Ocean on my right. "95 days, 4,330 miles, 140,000 feet of climbing, 12 free countries. A dozen shimmery pearls to inspire humans toward a more peaceful future. And one Guinness World Record. It was time to rest. Castles protected a smidge of land. Militaries protect our national borders on the globe. What will we develop to protect our pixel in the universe, our common home?